One of my interests about the world is the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians, I think, they occurred from 7,000 BC, 3,000 BC to 0 AD. So I think we had 3,000 BC of ancient Egyptians. And I think that they have had something like 7,000 years of ancient history. But I think the Egyptians are an African country. I think Egypt is an African country. So Egypt is an African country. I think there could be Arab and black people. So I think that the Egyptians are kind of very weak in history. I think that we discovered the ancient Egyptians with the Rosetta Stone and the hieroglyphics and the hieroglyphics, and I think that the Egyptians are kind of like a weak civilization. They're an African nation and a weak civilization. That's why they've never managed to conquer an empire. They've never managed to conquer an empire. I think that they've kind of simply decayed in history. They've done kind of a decay residue in history. I think they've done some kind of a decay residue in history. I think they bury people in sand. That's why the Romans visit Egypt. That's why Alexander the Great visits Egypt. That's why Babylon visits Egypt. That's why Persia visits Egypt. I think they bury people in sand because they're very weak as an African country. I think they're an African school of thought. I think they try to display the fact that people originate and migrate from Africa, but I think if you look at the crossroads of history and the world, it comes from the Middle East. I think the Middle East connects all countries of the world. It's kind of like the crossroads of the world. It connects Europe, Russia, Asia, Persia, Africa, the Mediterranean Sea. I think the Middle East is kind of like the crossroads of the world, connecting all countries of the world. So I think that human civilization originates in the Middle East as the crossroads of the world. I don't think human civilization originates from Africa. I think Africa is just Africa. It's unpopulated. It's primarily desert. They don't have a lot of migration. I don't think human civilization originates from Africa. I think it comes from the Middle East because the Middle East connects a lot of countries in the world together. It's some kind of crossroads in the world. So I think that's one important factor. I think Egypt is trying to kind of come to terms with itself in the world because of this fact that the Middle East is the crossroads of the world. I don't think Egyptians can accept that fact. That's why it's creating some kind of a testimony of Egyptians, ancient Egyptians. It's kind of burying people in African sand, but in a lot of other sand. I think the Egyptians could be quite evil in their culture and beliefs because it could involve human sacrifice. So I think that the ancient Egyptians are quite neglectful in history and world development. I think what the Egyptians claim to have done was to have created civilization from Africa, writing in parchment with papyrus. They claim They claim to have done hieroglyphics as well, which could be the first language, but it's like a drawing language. It's like a hologram language. The kind of African people who kind of state to world testimony that they built the pyramids. That's something like 10 to 100,000 cubic stones of stone, built with slaves over 10 to 100 years, with maybe 10 million people. I think countries have something like 100 to 200 million people, so it takes maybe 10% of the population to build the pyramids. So I think it's not so much a testimony to the world and history, it's simply a monument. I think that's what the pyramid of Egypt, the Egyptian pyramids are. It's just a monument. I think that's all it is. It's just a monument. It's a claim to testimony. It could be a claim to sovereignty. I think people can build lots of these big buildings. I think there should be big buildings, not monuments. I think if you look at the Eiffel Tower, the pyramids and the Great Wall of China, if you look at the Statue of Liberty, and you look at the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and you look at the canals and the other things, I think that most of the things are simply monuments. They're kind of like a slave worker force building a monument to the world, kind of as a conduct to the world. I think we could just build a lot of nice big buildings in the world, like the pyramids, like the Great Wall of China. It takes 10% of the population to work 10% of the time forever, with maybe 10% of the cost of government, to build a lot of these big buildings like the Taj Mahal, like the pyramids, like the Eiffel Tower. They seem to be useless in buildings. I don't think they look nice as well. They could be simply big buildings that kind of conduct some kind of discussion and art with people in the world and with civilizations and populations in the world. They could be like trade exchanges, something like that. I think that we could have maybe 100, 1,000 or 1,000,000 of these big civilization population exchanges. The population buildings, not just monuments. I think the population buildings, and I think they're quite cheap to build, with labour, cost, money, and lots of other dedication factors, commitment of force. So I think that we could have a lot of these things. We could have fountains, gardens, palaces, walls. We could have kind of like public congress buildings. We could have fantastic public congress buildings. We could have like cloud buildings like the Taj Mahal, where people visit for recollection, collection and meditation, and maybe worship as well. I think we could pick these buildings up from the testimony of history, from real life events from history, crucial dedicating factors of history that populate these buildings. I think that's what these buildings do. Thank you.